Today, I have the beautiful Avalina Maline on the Awaken Feminine podcast, who is joining me all the way from Florida, USA. Welcome to the show.
Yay! Well, thank you. So happy to be here with you.
I'm so excited to have you on. Avalina is one of the beautiful authors of the Awaken Feminine book, and I'm just excited for our conversation and to have her here. So, Avalina, do you mind just sharing with our audience who you are and what you do?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, right?
It is.
Do we do? Um, I had my awakening about 12 or 13 years ago. And since then, I've just, not only working on myself, but assist others in whatever period they are in their journey of their own embodiment of their higher selves. And through one-on-one coachings, through courses, through transmissions. I do a lot of channeling. I do a lot of one-on-one work with people, and really to bring them into a place of a deeper connection with their higher self, an embodiment into the body, because that's really what this ascension cycle is. It's not only becoming into a higher vibration and connecting and being our godlike selves. It's coming into the body. So it's this ascension process that we're having. And so just assisting people in doing that and really living that life of more abundance, more love, joy, peace, and really having a sense of purpose of why they're here and why everything is happening the way it is today, because it's as we know, the collective is moving into this, and it's a huge dimensional shift that's happening all over the planet, and that can be quite chaotic if you're not really in that sense of centered space and knowing what this journey is about and what's really happening right now. So it's a very exciting time to be alive.
Yes, exciting, definitely, and interesting as well. And I think the work that you do is so important because there's more and more people, having their spiritual awakenings. And, we need people like yourself to help guide them along because it is a bit scary, especially if you're not someone that was spiritual maybe before you had the awakening, right? So, but
Yeah.
I'd love to dive a bit more into that in a second. But I always love to ask my guests this question before we jump into the conversation, and that's, what's your definition of an awakened feminine?
Mm. My definition would be someone who is really in tune with their mental body, their emotional body, and really coming from that place of connection with their higher self, and really having that deep sense of peace and purpose, and becoming very clear, very clear of the patterns and densities and the conditioning that we've all been exposed to. So it's a lot of self work. It's a lot of letting go. It's a lot of surrendering into really becoming the true nature and the knowing of and being that energy, being in that state of presence,
Mm.
throughout, everything, throughout every moment. So,
Yeah,
it's really more of a state of becoming, of being and remembering.
yeah, that's a beautiful definition. Thank you for sharing with us. Now, I felt when you were talking about, what you do and who you are, I felt really called to ask you about your spiritual awakening. Because I mean, obviously it dovetail into the work that you do now, but I would just really love to find out like what you were doing before your spiritual awakening and like how it kind of manifested or happened.
Yeah, I can go back really, really far. And what's interesting is one of the things that I was thinking about when when we joined the call was how I was when I was a child, and I was very rebellious, sort of not like fitting in. And it didn't occur to me then, but now it's like when you look back at that, a lot of times when we come in with the purpose of assisting and the purpose of awakening, we don't realize this when we're younger. And so we start to, we don't really conform, right? We don't really conform to being a good student. And so we often think that we're we're not smart, and we sort of don't fit in, we don't fit the mold, right? So it was very, challenging, when I was younger, of being in that sort of rebellious and not really, being a very good student. And so you tend to think, you start judging yourself and people tell you, oh, you're not a good student, and so you start to conform, right? You start to, like, it gets programmed out of you. So, it's really usually quite the opposite. We come in, we actually have that wisdom, but then we sort of forget it, right? We sort of get conditioned and no longer tap into that. So, I was very, very much independent in that way. So I had several careers, you could say. So I was a musician and a singer. I was a performer. I became a builder. I was building homes. So, about every 7 years, I would move on to something else. And then it was, and throughout my whole life, I was always lucid dreaming, and I just figured that was normal. And so at one point I came across this book, and I started practicing some exercises, just for, I didn't think much of it. And I actually went out of body, actually a couple of times. And so I realized there was a lot more to this dreaming state than I had originally thought. And so I joined this mysticism group, and I started reading all these books. And the very first time I sat down and meditated, I had this massive flash of white light, just, within a few minutes, where everything just turned white. And I continued to just, doing toning, and I had this just massive energy through toning. The Kundalini just, started rising, and I started, channeling and, hearing like just auto clariance. And it was just a really interesting journey, and it happened very quickly. So it was almost like I was primed, like I was ready for it. I just needed that instigation and the awareness of it. Yeah, it was very, it was a very exciting and interesting way to wake up. It wasn't typically like a lot of times you hear people, they go into a suffering or something, they hit a bottom and then they rise up. But for me, it was more mystical type of experiences that led me to believe, oh, everything that I've known all this time is true. And if I had just trusted myself, way back, because you can see the threads when you look back. It's so much easier to see like where you were on your stage. So yeah, very and it continues to this day. So it's such an exciting embodiment process, I would say.
Yeah, I love that, because like you say, a lot of times people have the spiritual awakening when they hit what everyone says rock bottom, or like something major happens in their life, but it's just like, hey, you just needed that little nudge to find the right people and do the right things, and then you are.
And usually that's the gift, right? That's our higher selves, because sometimes the more we pull away from our center, it's that's pointing you to come back. So it's almost like, even it may look like somebody's not following their path and they're going, away from their, the ascension or the embodiment of their higher selves, but actually it's, that's what they need to come back. And so often that's a gift. And if we can always look at it that way, we can honor where everyone is on their journey, because that's exactly what they need at that time.
Yeah. I always like to say, it's like, even if you go the scenic route, it's still the right route.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're really designing it, right? You're designing it for yourself, and who knows you better than you. And that's exactly what you need to see and move past, whatever it is that you've been holding on to, or the illusions that you've been holding on to. So it's quite fascinating when you surrender into that. It makes things so much easier, and you can move through it with so much more ease and grace.
There was a couple of things that I wanted to ask you as you was talking about your your spiritual awakening. Can just for our audience who doesn't know what toning is, can you explain a bit about what that is?
Yeah. So toning, well, it's exactly what it sounds like, right? It's just sound, right? So when we think of language, right, we have so much programming around language and definitions to them, labels to them. So when you hear pure sound, that's actually like the raw energy form, right? Because creation is sound, like everything is vibration. So everything in the universe, even matter, there's a color, a sound to everything. Like if you think of you pluck a string on the guitar, it vibrates, right? It creates a sound. A rainbow has colors. There's also a sound. You're just looking at different perspectives of the same energy, right? Versus whether you're looking at it through sound or through color or through feeling. So toning is just one of those. It's just like when you work with light therapy or colors, when you're working with the body, it's the same thing. It's just one vibration, but it's in that raw form without having the other energies, blockages, illusions around it that we tend to have as humans through our conditioning. So the sound, when you tone, you're vibrating a certain specific frequency through the body, and certain sounds will have a healing effect on the body, or it will awaken the body in a certain way. So when I was toning, when I first woke up, I was doing a specific sequence of raw tones. So it wasn't the typical scale that you hear music on today. In this specific frequency, it was, like a series of 4 tones, and you repeat this with a specific way of breathing. It's almost like a language. So it speaks to the body, and the cells in your body understand sound. So it's a way of communicating to the body that we don't quite understand. So when I was toning, I was literally speaking to the cells in my body. And the first time I did that, I did it for 15 minutes, the very first time I toned. And my body actually started to speak back to me. Like these tones, like it was a whole another language coming out. It literally sounded like R2D2 playing in my head. It was like, and it went on for like 10 minutes. It was like, my body was just like, oh yeah, I know what you're saying here. This. And so it starts coming back. It was one of the most interesting experiences I think I've ever had. But it was through the toning that really energized my feet. My feet went numb. I couldn't walk because so much energy was moving through my body when I toned that first time. So a lot of the work I do now is in toning, and it's just another way of bringing in a different energy, right? So there's multiple ways we can work in this way, and toning is just one of them, and one that has been really beneficial and clear to me when I can hear the tones. And so I can tone on somebody, on their body, and scan them and find things where there is no resonance, and so another tone will come in that can help clear that. So it's just something I kind of discovered and played with. And that's really what we all need to do, right? If we just get out and allow ourselves to explore our gifts and just have fun, we start to discover things that we're capable of. So,
wow, yeah. That's so cool. So with toning, so when you do it for others, so like with the sound, is it an instrument, or like, is it
it's my voice.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So like which frequency or like what sound to make, and
and sometimes tones will come out, or sometimes there'll be 2 tones at a time coming through. It's quite interesting. Or there'll be feedback that'll come back, or distortion. It's an endless discovery, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm just like my
our bodies are so amazing. Yeah.
So amazing. And I know, like, as you're saying, as you play more with it, more comes up, and then you can help others even more because you've discovered like something new again and again and again. Yeah,
Yeah,
so that's
yeah.
really
And
cool.
that's exactly, a lot of times what I tell people when they're, working on their own gifts is it's in the doing, right? It's like you have to get out and give try it, practice. And as you're doing it, you discover, like if you sit around and wait for, like, well, what am I supposed to do? Where are my gifts? Then you're just waiting and waiting. But when it's in the doing and doing things, you discover them. So it's, just trying something and seeing where it takes you and seeing what excites you and what feels like you're getting response from, energetically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was another question I want to ask you, but as you're talking about this, so say for example, I want to see auras, for example. Can I then go, how would someone start playing with,
Yeah.
trying to a new gifts? Yeah.
And it's interesting how like how you were saying, like, I want to do this. And usually when we have an interest in something, there's a reason for it, right? When we have an interest in something, it's probably because we may be good at that. So it's always, following that, right? Allowing yourself to go there. But particularly with auras, in this, it's interesting because I do a lot with the eyes, and really seeing that is really relaxing the eyes. It's always the opposite of what we think. It's always, allowing and relaxing. It's just like when we want to see something, we squint, right?
Yeah.
And that's the opposite of what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to relax the eyes so the eyes can actually focus, right? Instead of forcing it. So, with auras, seeing auras is actually quite easy because you can actually do it with yourself if you stand, particularly if you stand behind like a white wall and you look in the mirror and you really just sit there and you relax the eyes. You totally relax them and you look at the, not directly. It's not the point of focus. It's the peripheral. So if you're looking straight and you kind of look off, you kind of allow what's happening on the sides and you relax, you will start to see the colors move out. Or you can feel your aura by just closing your eyes and slowly like putting your hands together, and you'll feel, okay, so like right there, I can feel the first layer of the aura, which is the etheric body, which is about 2 inches, about 2 inches all the way around the body, and it's blue. You can feel it. You can feel the tension increase, release, increase, release. And if you do that and you practice, practice with that, then eventually you'll start to feel somebody when they come into the room, way behind you, you can feel it. So it's just like playing an instrument, right? You just practice and play with it, right? But typically if there's an interest in something, there's a reason for you to explore it.
Yeah. That's so cool. So really, if for our listeners, if they are interested in something like a certain gift, then they kind of do a bit of exploration around how to do it and then start practicing and just then seeing where it takes them.
Yeah, because when we have an interest in something, that means we have a passion for it. And if we have a passion for it, then that's coming from here, right? That's coming from like soul. The soul's driving that. So yeah, always following that, because that and like often our greatest challenge and our greatest fear is often our greatest purpose.
Yeah.
The thing that terrifies us the most sometimes is often what we're meant to overcome.
Yeah.
So those things can be exciting, and there can be a level of fear with it as well. But it's a fear that comes with excitement.
Yeah.
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 Because you're stepping out of your comfort zone to do something that's, not your norm. So it's exciting and also a bit scary, but the most rewarding.
Yes, for sure. Definitely. But I think a lot of people get stuck on the fear and don't realize that it's excitement, because and then they stop. Yeah. So it's just a reminder that if you're feeling that fear, exciting fear, just keep going.
Yeah.
And you'll get past it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like when I was most of my life I was terrified of public speaking, terrified. I mean, I had I think it was in third grade where I had to get up in front of the classroom, and you know how you have to do your show and tell.
Yes.
and you had like, I don't know, like 3 minutes to speak or something. And I got up there and I had no idea that I wasn't going to be able to talk. I thought I was just going to get up there and share like everyone else. But I got up there and my whole throat just closed up and I couldn't say anything. And then the teacher was just like, oh, you've got 3 minutes, you're going to have to stand up there the whole time. You need, tell us about your, because we had made these like terrariums out of shoebox or something. And I couldn't speak. I was so terrified. And literally for the rest, all through school, every time I had to speak, it was just like my throat would literally close up. So, overcoming that was actually part of, what I was here to do, to clear that. And, it's such a 360 compared to how I was when I was younger, and what I do now. So yeah, often our greatest challenge is part of what we're here to do.
Yeah. I so relate to that. I hated public speaking, and you would not catch me dead.
Yeah. Like, it was the one thing that I would not do.
Yeah.
I even became a singer. Like I could even, I would be up on stage, I was performing, but singing is very different than talking, right? Because you're singing, you're actually performing, you know what you're going to say, you've rehearsed. It's a totally different experience than just getting up and talking in front of a large audience, a live, audience. Terrifying, years ago. It's so interesting. And when you move through that, when you move through your biggest fear, it's like the most empowering thing.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah. So it's not usually about that one thing. It's just about overcoming the one thing.
Yeah. Thanks for the reminder. Yes.
Yeah.
The question I wanted to ask you before, you were talking about your Kundalini awakening. Mm-hmm. Can you also talk a bit about that for our audience who like, what's Kundalini awakening?
Yeah. So our bodies are very connected to, like, it's earth, right? It's like earth energy, right? It's Kundalini's the energy that comes up through the body and circulates in our field, like that toroidal field, right? And it circulates around. So it's not like this cosmic energy. It's not the cosmic energy that comes down like, your higher self, your oversoul, your monad. It's a clearing of the body. So, we have all the chakras that move up, and as this energy is able to flow, up through the chakras, it moves all the energy up and clears, right? So the more clear we get, the more work we do on ourselves, the better this energy flows. And that energy, it's also, is often stuck in the root, right? So it's also like creation energy, it's sexual energy, it's all of that as it moves up. And when that happens, that's a lot of times when these gifts come along, right? And it's a process. And, it's not, typically, you don't have someone who just has a full-blown Kundalini awakening where it's just, you're completely done, right? Like it's a process. It clears illnesses. You detox. I had massive detoxing when it first started, to the point where I would be, vomiting like once a week. It was really intense because it's a lot of that electromagnetic energy of the field, just like Gaia has hers. Each human vessel has theirs. So it's a very electromagnetic energy, and it's very healing. Like it heals the body, and it just brings the body into a perfect flow and harmony and balance. And that allows for more of the your soul, higher self, monad, all the layers, all the way up to the creator, to come into the body. right? So, and that's really what this process is about that we're doing now is clearing the body so we can be our godlike selves as human. It's, all the ascension cycles that, we've experienced, the lifetimes we've experienced. It's this time here and now, right on this planet, where it is the most exciting time to be here, because we are actually have the possibility, and the energies are here where we can embody a greater degree than we ever have before into our bodies, and to become really our God selves in a human body. So that's the energy that helps the physical body. It clears the entire light body. It's a whole multidimensional process, but and we're all, at different stages. Everyone has Kundalini that's moving. It's not like it's, I need to awaken my Kundalini. It's happening, right? It's like it's happening for everyone. Yeah. And sometimes it just moves up quicker in certain times, or you release something and all of a sudden you start getting these surges. So it's not something that you have to really focus on or do anything. Like, you don't do Kundalini like it does you when you're ready, and it just moves through. So it's not something I typically like really, focus on. Because it's just going to do what it does. It's just going to flow. You can't force the energy. The energy is just going to move when it needs to, right? It's more of like allowing, right? It's allowing it to happen versus trying to like force it or make it happen.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us, we like to make things happen rather than just allowing it, right?
Yeah, because it's a different, when you allow it, it creates a softness, right? Often when I'm working, I will just connect with the energy of allowing first. And when you do that, it's just like your whole field. The energy of allowing is just this softness. It's open. There's no agenda. And when you don't have that, there's no, when there's a focus of wanting something, sometimes we have a contraction around it and we limit things. So when you just connect with the energy of allowing, it opens you up to things you may not have, knew were possible, right? And you allow for more to come in.
Yeah, I love that, because it's like you don't have any expectations of how things should inverted commas look like, or how they should come about, right?
Yeah. And especially like when you're, like channeling, like when you're channeling for yourself or for others, or it's always, allowing, because you never know, right, what your higher self may have to share with you. And so the more you can allow that to happen, the better it is for you, right? The more you get, you open yourself to more bandwidth of frequencies to come in.
Yeah. I want to ask you about channeling, because you said when that was kind of like one of the first things I just started channeling.
Yeah.
How was that for you? And like, I'm always fascinated, like when you start channeling, like who do you channel? Like, who did you channel? Or like, was it your higher self? Like, all the things. And how do you know that it's a higher energy, speaking through?
The first time I was meditating, and I was in a very and it's interesting, and I'll share this because this ties into what we were just saying, is I had been meditating for probably a good hour and, nothing. But then when I was just like, okay, I'm just going to not meditate anymore. I'm just going to sit here with my eyes closed. And it was in that state is when the voice came in, right? It wasn't when I was meditating, because when I was just like, let go of the meditation and I was sitting there, I was like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and enjoy this energy and this feeling. I'm just going to sit here for a little bit. That was the energy of allowing, right? So, and that's when I heard, Spirit is here. Why don't you ask it a question? Very clear. And in my own voice. So often when we channel, it's we hear our own voice. and of course the astonishment of that, like, it took me out of this space. I was like, what? So I couldn't get back into it, but that would happen frequently. But how do we know is you feel it, right? Because when we're, and when I channel, I only channel, I in the beginning, I would channel a lot of my guides and sometimes other beings, I would communicate with them, but typically, they speak as a group. So I hold the intention to always channel my higher self. And that's what I always recommend doing for everyone, because no one knows you better than your higher self. And when we try to go outside, to others, it can be a little bit more confusing, right? And then you open yourself up to others' agendas. But so when you hold the intention to connect to your higher self, it always comes with that energy of love, right? Because when we open ourselves up and connect in, even if our higher self is giving something to us, in a stern way, it always has that softness to it. There's no asking of anything. It's always, it always comes with a feeling of home. When you get that message, there's no way to not feel it, right? It's a connection, right? Because the energy of love is actually based on the energy of connection. So that's typically what I do, and it's never steered me wrong. It's always you always get the clearest answer, in my opinion, when you connect inward to yourself. Because when you connect out to other beings, there's always, I wouldn't say always, but there's typically another, they have their own agendas, they have their own purposes. And it's not to say that it's not assisting you, but, particularly if you're new to channeling, I would always suggest just holding the intention to connect with your higher self, because where we put our focus is, where the energy follows. And we can all do it. It's actually so much easier than we think. The first time that I actually started doing, channeling, as talking, right? Like I would, let the voice come through me and I would record it. Yeah, that was really, really exciting and really powerful. So it's so much easier, because really, the way it happened is I knew I was capable of doing this, but it wasn't until I heard someone who was channeling make a comment, and it was just like a side comment of, yeah, it's so easy. You just open your mouth and start talking. And it was hearing that, and that distilled it down very simply for me. I was like, oh, okay, maybe I guess so. And then so when I tried it, I was like, oh my God, like it was so easy. It was like, I could have been doing this the whole time. Like I was making it into be this big thing, like, oh, I got to hear this booming voice. And it's much easier than we think, because we're doing it all the time. Yeah. We're hearing that voice all the time. Yeah. So it's just giving yourself permission to trust what you get, as it comes through. And, journaling is an easy way to do it. Or for me, I like just to get a recorder and talk rather than write, because sometimes if I write, I have to break the connection to write out, and then I connect, and then I write, and then I connect and write. And sometimes I just get out the recorder and just go. And you'll surprise yourself if you try that. And you'll feel it, because it'll just be pure wisdom. It'll be truth. It'll be love. And it's coming. It's coming from yourself. It's coming from a higher part of you. And it always feels good to do it.
Yeah. I want to ask you, because you talked about trusting what comes through. Did you ever not trust what was coming through?
Yeah. Well, actually, when I would hear, I always trusted that, but it was more of the trusting of the day to day of what I was feeling and what I was getting. Should I do this? The decisions here, the decisions there. But when I actually did an exercise once, and this is what really moved me into the energy of trust, is I sat down and was like, okay, what is the energy of trust for me? What does that feel like? What does that mean to me? And I would jot down, and it could be anything like, like trust feels like, having a warm blanket with you everywhere you go, never having to worry. Like worry can't exist in the energy of trust. And so I wrote down all these, just brainstormed all these things about, and so every day I would go back and read that and remind myself what that feels like, because you have to step into the feeling. You have to be the trust first, because it's not mental, right? It's not exactly a mental concept. And we want to like, oh, here's the information. Do I trust it? Do I believe this? But if you step into the energy of being that, of being trust and feeling the trust, knowing the trust, then as the information, as the awareness comes in, you don't have to ask yourself if you trust this, because it just is. You just know. So it becomes this knowing, it becomes more of a knowing in the moment versus an analytical process of what did I get and do I believe that? Because that doesn't happen. That linear way of thinking doesn't happen when you completely trust.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
It's instantaneous. Like you can't even ask a question because you just know. It's a knowing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when you embody trust, you just, whatever comes through is, like you say, that's it. There's no questioning it, because that's just it. Yeah. This came up as you were talking. So you channel your like higher self, but then, sometimes, your ego or, some other voices might come in and might steer you in the wrong direction. So for people like who are going, well, I'm getting this information, but I don't know if it's actually my higher self or whether it's, some other entity or my ego or, whatever they want to call it, coming through and getting in the way to steer me. Like, how would they differentiate the information? Or would you say, like before, like you just trust?
Yeah. I guess it would, how like if you're asking a specific question of, because your higher self is never going to tell you what to do. So one part of it is how the energy is coming through, and your higher self doesn't say, oh, you should do this, you should do that, because your higher self really doesn't really focus on how you express yourself in the 3D world. It's more about how you're being and where how you're moving, how you show up for example, your service. It doesn't matter what it looks like to the higher self. It doesn't matter if you're doing, what I'm doing with, working with people or channeling, or you're doing podcasts. Your higher self doesn't care, as long as you're in the flow of the direction of what you came here to do. How it actually unfolds and looks like doesn't really matter. So when information comes in, the higher self, it's going to be more of a baseline of foundational type of energy, whereas often when the ego comes in, it's analytical and it's opinionated. It will have things with like, oh well, this should be done because of this, or and that's when the mind comes in, right? Because information that comes in for your higher self is and you'll feel it when you start to, it has a different energy and a softness and a tone to it versus the mind going on tangents of details and how this is supposed to be, and this you have to like really, once you start to, you cannot not notice once you start to really practice, because it's a totally different feeling and energy when it's the higher self versus the mind. And it starts to become very clear. It starts to become very obvious. Yeah. Even if I'm channeling something and I'll hear my mind go, oh, you're not going to say that. That's, I'm like, okay, and that's what the mind will do, is like, oh, you can't share that. You can't say that in front of all these people, and it becomes funny, right? It's just like, oh yeah, okay, they're there,
Like, step back.
Yeah. So it's a different feeling. It's a different, I don't want to say it's more general when the higher self speaks, but it's more from a higher perspective than a lower perspective. And when you tap into it, you'll feel the different layers of perspective that's being shown.
Yeah.
It's always going to have more wisdom and insight when it's from the higher self, and you'll feel it in your heart. It's like, oh, yeah, I feel it, versus the chatter.
Yeah. Like what I see when you were talking was like your higher self is like kind of like looking over and giving you that perspective from like, looking in, and the wisdom that they can see from everything that's happening.
Yeah.
Whereas like your mind or your ego or whatever is like in the 3D.
Like, right.
It's like all the things. That's what I was seeing, the picture.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like in this little matchbox, right? Of space. Yeah, it's very true. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love how it kind of circled back to like, I think when I was asking you, if I want to develop a gift, what do I do? And it's like in the doing, like is the practicing, and it's the same connecting with your higher self. It's all about practicing and doing, so that then you can differentiate and it becomes easier. Like you say, it's just kind of like a bit of a full circle.
Because your higher self is always ready and willing to communicate with you. Literally, like, if anyone who has a dog, when you come home, your dog is like super excited and like going ballistic, and your higher self is literally like every chance it gets, it is there, like, super excited to connect with you. And that's for everyone. I mean, that especially right now. So yeah.
And it's just taking that time to pause from your busyness to connect.
And slow down, right? We move so fast. So you really have to allow yourself to take the time. And we resist it a lot. We don't want to sit down and we make it into a practice. We're like, oh, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to channel now, or I'm going to connect with my higher self. And it becomes like a separateness from our daily life. And when we get into that space, because when we're connecting, we have to be receptive to that. And we have to be receptive to allowing love to come in. And a lot of times we don't do that. And if we're not really in that space of self-love, we resist going into the space of love. And so we're like, oh, I'm going to channel. I'm like, oh, I'll do it in like 10 minutes. And then, oh, I'll do it a little bit later. I'll do it later. And it's a resistance to opening yourself up to that energy of love.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. I'm like thinking of like me. I'm like, do it later. And it is exactly what you say, is because I just don't want to.
You're not in that space. Yeah. You're not in the space of loving yourself in that moment. And so it's like, subconsciously, oh, like if I'm going to sit down and channel, I have to step into that energy of love. And I'm not ready to do that right now. I don't want to do that now. I'll do that when I'm, a little bit later. But it's truly a resistance to allowing love in at that moment.
Yeah.
We can channel at any time. We can channel when we're doing the dishes. We can channel when we're driving. It does not matter. It does not have to be this big ordeal where we, make it into like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to meditate at this hour. I'll meditate in the morning. I'll do this, and so we end up compartmentalizing, which is fine in the beginning. We have to start somewhere. But eventually it gets to bringing everything together, where everything is a meditation. Everything is spiritual. Everything is a part of your journey.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you
that's when it
for,
really starts to accelerate. Yeah.
yeah. Um, I know you were just saying that, when like as you connect more with your higher self, you can connect anytime. But for
Mhm.
people that are wanting to get started, is there like a ritual or like something that will help them to kind of get into that space to connect with their higher
Mhm.
self?
I like to use the breath. When I sit, I will use the breath and take deep breaths into the body, and I just allow the conscious breath to come into the body, up through my channel, connect up through the channel, through your soul, your higher self, all the way to the soul of the universe. So you're staying in your channel. You're only bringing in your energy. You're not going outside of yourself, and breathing. And when you also, another thing is, if you focus in the cave of Brahman, that space that's it's sort of like right in the center of the head. When you put your attention there, it's much easier to have no thought when you put your attention there. And then just connect, having the intention to connect, and you can do that pretty quickly, actually.
Yeah.
It's not, you don't have to go into some deep like state of being. You don't have to be in samadhi. You don't, to connect, right? Like you can do it at any time. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that you say that because I think a lot of times people think, oh, I need to like you were saying before, like I
Yeah.
need to meditate for an hour, but you just
Yeah.
kind of connected
And you
when you
don't.
just kind
Yeah.
of allowed it to happen. So it's kind of just allowing it to
Yeah.
happen rather
It's
than
letting,
forcing
yeah.
it to happen, right?
Yeah. And often when we try, like if we're trying really hard, we're actually pushing, and we're doing the opposite of what we need to do. So if you're trying to channel, then stop. Just stop, and just allow yourself to speak to yourself. And sometimes even you can even start a conversation with yourself, like you're like, I'm not getting nothing, I get crickets. Then ask yourself, what would my higher self say to me in this moment? And then write that down, because in a way you're doing that, you're sort of bypassing, and you're giving yourself permission to get your higher voice, because we have a mental block. Oh, I can't hear anything, I'm not getting anything. Then just ask them, well, what would let me imagine what my higher self would say. And when you do that, you allow it to come in. So you're still getting the answer, but you're positioning your mind to where you're asking it to ask for you, answer for you.
Yeah.
And it'll come through that way.
Yeah. So
It's
you're
a
kind
little
of tricking the
tricky.
mind.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. I'm just looking at the time like, oh, I would love to ask you so much more, but so much wisdom that you've shared with us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Avalina, before we wrap up, what would you like our listeners to take away with them from our conversation today?
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing I think now is, because we're all going through this process, whether we're aware of it or not, is to let go of the judgment of where you are on your journey, because where you are is perfect, and the timing of everything is perfect for you. And when you surrender to that, you allow more flow to come in, and you allow more things to move more quickly. We always, when we listen to other people's journeys, we think, oh, well, this isn't happening to me, or, when is this going to happen? When we let go and understand that what's occurring for me in my reality at this moment is exactly what I need. It's exactly what I need to shift, whatever is ready for me to let go of. So if you look at everything that's happening to you and around you at this moment, that is the perfect catalyst for you. And you designed it that way. You designed your journey this way. And so when you honor that, you allow much more joy in the moment, and in every moment becomes more, more joyful, even in the midst of something that's uncomfortable. So it's remembering that. It's remembering that you chose this mission, you chose this challenge, and it's perfect for you to have the biggest shift and the biggest change and vibration and awareness and to evolve your consciousness at this time as a human. So yeah, it can be a very joyful experience if you allow it to be.
Yeah, thank you. That's just gold what you shared. Thank you so much. Thank you thank you so much for sharing your love and wisdom with us today. If people want to find out more about you or how they can work with you, where's the best place to find you?
My website is creatoressence.com, or you can just put in my name, Avalina Maline, and usually that will come up if you just search that. That's the best way to find me. Yeah.
Perfect. I'll have all your details in the show notes so people can reach out to you. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much.